All right, here we go, y'all. The last part. All right, so you can go to 100 different pages and you can listen to ex-inmates talk about race and how they feel about it now. You can listen to all kinds of stuff, but I'm going to tell you the raw right now on part 3 about Texas, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and racism inside the walls as a correctional officer. So there are some racist bosses that work in the prison. There are bosses that actually will discriminate against anything, just like the free world. What makes the prison kind of unique is that it's such a hateful, toxic environment. People that are not racist will sometimes use racist or derogatory terms about another race or type of people, just because it's the common language, or what is it, parlance that's used at the time in that location. So they're really, I don't believe they're racist in their heart or would act out other than verbally. Even that's not right. I'm not giving them a pass. They're still terrible for doing it that way, but it's a common thing in the prison. They're adapting to this abnormal environment and they're behaving abnormally. Even if you ask their family, they'll be like, yeah, so-and-so has really changed since he started working at the prison, because it happens. And there are some real racist people that refer to people like as bugs or insects, or they'll be like, when I first got back to SEG, I asked one guy why the inmate was banging on the cell, and he said, well, he's doing that because he's African. I said, what's that mean? He's like, well, because he's black and that's how black people act. And that put me in a real predicament, right? Because my wife and my family, my kids are mixed, and everybody I love, right? Like, so I was put in a position where, like, what do? Do you can't up and quit. You still got your bread and meat. If you don't work, you don't eat. You know what I'm saying? So, I was just quiet about things. And then one day he asked me, he says, hey boss, he's like, so tell me about your wife. And I said, hey, I just like jokingly, like there's this joking thing going on and stuff. And I told him, I was like, hey, I hope that we can still be friends, even though we really wasn't friends. I hope we can still be friends, but my wife is black. And he just starts bust up laughing and rolling on the ground laughing. And I said, no, like, I'm serious. She is. And he says, I know, that's why it's so funny. So maybe he knew and, was giving me a little bit extra shit. But really kind of after that, it kind of slowed down, because maybe he was worried I was going to tell, or maybe eventually I had earned his respect, because respect is such a big thing in there. But he was actually genuinely a real racist person. There was a couple people like that. I was up working in the picket with an African-American guy one day, and we're talking on a stenophone, and that means I could talk from one pod to another pod without using the telephone. It's like walkie-talkie kind of. Think of it that way, but built in the wall. And so I'm up there with the older African-American guy, and you can hear somebody walk up into the picket, and somebody throws something on the ground, and he says the N-bomb real loud. And then the African-American guy says, what's going on, officer so-and-so? And he's like, oh, nothing, just, down here, they're doing this to me or whatever. So we hang up the stenophone with him, and I asked the boss, I asked him, I said, how do you do it? You heard him say the N-word and you didn't say anything. Like, I didn't say anything. And he had been out there like 10 or 15 years at the time. And he told me straight up, he's like, it is not my responsibility to change anybody's mind about how they think. And he says, nor would I ever be able to change their mind. And that is something that has always stuck with me, and I have carried it with me, and it's been valuable to me to this day, because he was right. There was nothing that I was going to be able to do or say that was going to change this person's mind. The only thing that I could do is just to make sure things were done fair and equally on my pod, and that nobody got messed off because of their race. And that really never, when I was working with that person in particular, that never really happened, because it was more, it was SEG, so it's very limited interactions anyway. We were just doing what we had to do, and most of the time he was a senior boss. He wanted to run the picket, I let him, and I just do what I had to do. You know what I mean? He'd try to screw me out of feed and chow anyway. You know what I mean? But he ended up being all right with me. You know what I'm saying? And the biggest problem I had was, it's a thing with me, like, should I said something? I didn't say anything. Where is my responsibility in that? But like I said, that guy said, the officer I was telling you about said I wasn't going to change my mind or whatever. But listen, tell me what you think about it in the comments, right? Like, what should I have done? And matter of fact, if you haven't worked in a prison or been incarcerated in a prison, don't leave a comment, because you don't know the vibe, you don't know the atmosphere, you don't know the lingo, the language. Again, you couldn't talk to me about this because it's alien to you. It's the situation I was put in is completely alien. But I would love to hear from somebody and an ex-correctional officer or an ex-inmate about it, So, as far as me on the free world and stuff, I don't judge people on their thoughts or beliefs or anything like that. What I had learned from that man that day was invaluable. Like I said, if on TikTok, if somebody says something that I disagree with, I just keep scrolling, or I watch, or maybe I ask a question. Why do you feel this way about this? I want to know where they're coming from. I'm trying to learn from everybody, and it's actually helped me in social work. Because as a social worker, you cannot refuse to work with somebody because they're saying something racist. I just couldn't. I'm ethically obligated to help that individual. You know what I mean? So the lesson that I learned from that old man that day was that meet people where they're at. And that's what I've done in social work. I can only hope to understand their point of view better. You know what I mean? And because I'm not going to say anything to change a lifetime of racism in a meeting. It's just not going to happen. Or walking the run. Or through Messenger or something like that. I'm not changing anybody's mind, but I can hope to understand where they're coming from and maybe hear the trauma that caused them to be this way, or the nature and nurture, right? The nature that learned them to be this way, because social learning, a person learns how to behave, right? So, are there racist correctional officers in prison? 100%. Is every correctional officer you're going to run across? No, not everybody is. Is it more than, are you going to hear racial terms more than you would on the free world? Yes, you will. Do people take that shit home? Yes, they do. You know what I mean? And other people don't. It's just like anywhere else in the world, But, and don't think just it's a white thing either, right? Because it's these, the black guys and black gangs will talk to other black correctional officers, and they'll start, that damn white guy up in there in the picket, he ain't watching you, you know what I mean? And then, next thing you know, maybe that black officer is saying something that he wouldn't normally say if he was not in that situation. Or the Hispanics, they start speaking in Spanish, and they'll be like pinchy gringo or something like that, you know what I mean? And something that they would never say in the real world. We're talking about a person's sexuality in a kind of way. Not anything they would say in the real world, but it's so common in there that people do it. Now, me, I can honestly tell you 100%, let me stop rocking this chair. I can tell you 100% with everything in me, I never called a person a racist anything, because y'all saw the pictures of my family. And that was just some of those morals and values and ethics, those things that was in me that I just wasn't going to cross that line. For others, that line might have been more fluid and they were more willing to cross it. And look, if you can't do the crime, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. And if you're not ready to be in this kind of environment, do not apply at TDCJ, because people have said there's racial boss and these words and the lingo, and there's racial things left over from slave. Yes, you're right. A lot of that stuff probably is left over, and a lot of that stuff is alive and well right out there at the damn All Red Unit and every other prison out here, especially maximum security penitentiary, right? The officers don't segregate anybody, but the inmates segregate themselves. I know this is long, it's drawn out. If y'all have any questions, feel free to ask. I did the best with the tools and resources that I had at the time. Obviously, at 43, I'm a different man. I'm in a different position in my life, and I've made enough money where I don't have to accept or tolerate anything that I don't want to. You know what I'm saying? But that was not the reality in my late 20s. I was still getting it together at that point, like a lot of other people. All right, I'll holler at y'all. This has been very long. Y'all have a good night.